Remember, do not underestimate the power of PlayStation.
Space. It's huge. So huge, in fact, that if you lost your car keys in it, they would be almost impossible to find. Luckily for Ratchet, Captain Copernicus L. Quark was on the case. His mission, rescue the Lombax's one and only friend. Yep, without Clank, Ratchet was alone in the universe. Alone. Alone. Alone.
You realize this ship has an ejector seat, right?
Let's get it out of the way. Ratchet & Clank Future: A Crack in Time, released in late 2009 for the PS3, is now my favorite of the Future series. It's arguably the biggest step forward for this series since Going Commando on the PlayStation 2, and competes with that title for my overall favorite Ratchet game. Unfortunately, it has a few missteps that I feel hold it back and may harm its perception long term, but we'll touch on that as we go along. We'll start with the plot. Clank, as we learned in Quest for Booty, has been trapped by Dr. Nefarious and the Great Clock in the center of the universe, give or take 50 feet. Nefarious is looking to gain control of time, and Clank is the key to succeeding with his plan. As it turns out, Clank is the son of Orvis, a Zoni that loves awful jokes, and the creator of the Great Clock. Yeah, I guess back when Clank was created on Core-2, Orvis gave him a Zoni soul and installed a program of himself into Clank. That's, you know what? I'll allow it. If we gotta massage Clank's origin story some, I'm just glad it's with something that tells terrible jokes. Anyway, Nefarious uses a device that puts the Great Clock and Zoni into disarray, allowing Clank to escape from his trap. Ultimately, Nefarious caused too much damage to the area, and before making an escape, Nefarious's butler Lawrence immobilizes Clank. Meanwhile, Ratchet is still on the hunt for Clank, with Quark of all people by his side. Their ship is hit by some strange energy, causing them to crash onto a planet inhabited by creatures called Fongoids. Get used to these things because they are all over this game. Nyarf. It's here that they meet up with the Fongoid chief, who says he knows a way to fix Ratchet's ship with the power of the Zoni, introducing the gameplay element of forced Zoni capture, which you can guarantee I'll touch on later. After a return to the Fongoid village, they find that they are being invaded by a force led by Lord Vorsalon, who has mistaken Ratchet for another Lombax called Azimuth. Whoa, but wait, Ratchet was the last Lombax, right? So after freeing the Fongoids from Vorsalon, Quark gives Ratchet intel about where to find Azimuth, and upon meeting Azimuth, tries to kill Ratchet, thinking he's a hologuise sent to kill him. Azimuth just happens to be a wanted Lombax stowing away on this planet, and can't believe that there's another Lombax alive, let alone the son of his close friend Kaidan. After a little talk about the Great Clock and needing to find Clank, Azimuth agrees to help Ratchet. Whew, usually I've covered a plot by now. Would you believe that this is only the first few hours of the game? I skimmed over the plot pretty heavily in my Tools of Destruction video, but I got some feedback from you all on Twitter that more heavy plot summaries are preferred. So from here on out, if you'd like to avoid spoilers, skip ahead to the time mark in the video. I have an annotation here, so if you have those turned off, now would be a good time to turn them on. So meanwhile, Clank is revived by Sigmund, a timid yet enthusiastic robot who is the junior caretaker of the Great Clock. Sigmund takes Clank to the Mnemone chamber, where Clank meets with the Orvis program in his head, who reveals that he left the Great Clock to Clank to take care of, which is why the Zoni abducted him in Tools of Destruction. Clank gets a fancy spear and is warned by Orvis that the Great Clock isn't meant to be used as a time machine, only a device to help keep time in line. All while this happens, Nefarious calls in some troops called the Valkyries, who kind of look like Helga, but apparently there's no relation. Anyway, Ratchet and Azimuth set out to locate another Obsidian Eye to communicate with Clank and track his location, and Azimuth spills the beans about the Lombax's downfall, citing being approached by an inventor who would turn on their species, that inventor being Emperor Tachyon, of course. As it turns out, Ratchet's father Kaidan warned Azimuth not to trust Tachyon, but Azimuth granted Tachyon access to all of the Lombax's technology and secrets, granting him the key to form his own army and wreak havoc. This puts Ratchet in the unfortunate position of traveling with the person responsible for the downfall of his kind, but being unaware of the dangers of using the Great Clock for time manipulation, he goes along with Azimuth's plan to undo this wrong. Speaking of time manipulation, let's hurry things along here. Ratchet and Azimuth get a hold of Clank, who tells them to head to Xanathar to help Orvis by way of a time portal that had opened there. It turns out that Nefarious and Lawrence crash landed there a few years prior and brainwashed the Fongoids into believing they were their saviors. Naturally, Ratchet undoes this while sneaking in a little damage to Nefarious, but is unable to help Orvis. Ratchet then hears from Vorsalon that he's captured Azimuth. So Ratchet rescues Azimuth. Frankly, Vorsalon is pretty great at capturing people and pretty shitty at keeping them captured. Back to Clank, he visits his subconscious again and meets the Plumber, the series' running gag. The Plumber says he must have taken a wrong turn since he meant to wind up in Quark's brain, and tells Clank rather randomly that he wouldn't risk any more than 6 minutes, which we'll keep in mind because that winds up becoming a major plot point from a running gag character. In a main character's subconscious, let's just get back to that when it's time. Pun intended. It turns out that Nefarious was back and had immobilized Clank and Sigmund just as Quark arrives at his base in a nurse's outfit. Meanwhile, Azimuth lets Ratchet know that he's picked up a distress signal that just happens to match Clank's unique signature on a planet called, wait for it, Vapepedia. It turns out the Valkyries were there waiting to ambush Ratchet, and that the distress call had been faked by Nefarious. It turns out that Clank was here anyway, though, and as Ratchet defeated a Valkyrie named Cassiopeia, he grabbed Clank and rescued him. Clank forgives him for not being able to save Orvis, and explains to Ratchet that using the Great Clock to undo the Lombax's history would be dangerous, putting Ratchet in a tight spot between listening to Clank or Azimuth's pleas to right his wrongs. Azimuth winds up leaving them as our duo sets off to fight Nefarious. The two follow a plan put forth by Quark to infiltrate Nefarious's base, but ultimately they're caught by Nefarious, who flings them away on a slingshot. It makes a little more sense in the game. They crash land at Gimlick Valley, where they once again use a time portal to help turn the tides of a Fongoid battle, and help procure themselves a ship through the power of plot convenience. Seriously, they travel like 10 years back, help everyone, ask for a ship as a favor for their help, and then before getting the ship they ask for, they jump 10 years forward and just ask to borrow a ship anyway? It winds up being a ship they destroyed that's fixed up, so it kinda connects back around, but what? Anyway, they get back to Nefarious, best him on top one of his ships, and narrowly avoid an autopiloted crash into his station. So Ratchet, Clank, and Azimuth wind up back at the Great Clock to see Clank off to his new duty. Azimuth, however, is still adamant about manipulating time and shoots Ratchet out of his way. Clank manages to cut him off and locks him out from the main chamber, then suddenly his memory reminds him of the Plumber's line about not risking more than 6 minutes. So, Clank just turns back time a few minutes and saves Ratchet from Azimuth's blast, leading Azimuth to make it to the main chamber first and being able to turn back time. Clank's action here saved time, admittedly, ultimately, but considering that Azimuth made it into the chamber, it was kind of a dumb move, ultimately. Anyways, the Great Clock starts to crumble. You face Azimuth as the final boss, in what's admittedly a pretty challenging fight. Ratchet eventually talks sense into Azimuth, and he sacrifices himself to stop the time manipulation and save the Great Clock. With the threat stopped, Ratchet leaves Clank to his duty for good, but Clank finds Orvis's words that while he left the Great Clock for Clank, he would much rather his son do what makes him feel whole, which is kind of sweet. Clank promotes Sigmund, who has proven incredibly inept at stopping threats throughout the game, and jumps back in Ratchet's ship for the next adventure. Whew! This is why I don't usually do plot summaries. Overall, A Crack in Time tells what is probably the most engaging story in the series, even if game pacing eventually gets in the way throughout in the form of Zoni Collection, and don't worry, I still plan on getting to that later. It's the story of a friendship that can stand the test of great circumstance and trials, the story of one creature's desire blinding him to a disastrous outcome, and the story of Nefarious being an incredibly entertaining villain despite incredibly shallow desires. It's an interesting blend and feels like a great payoff to what has been building since Tools of Destruction and Quest for Booty. It's a bit fragile at point, like most time travel stories. Under scrutiny, it falls apart some, but it's a video game telling an engaging story, not a perfectly written one. Coupling a more experienced way of storytelling with a much nicer presentation, seriously, these cutscenes are a delight to watch, it's hard to not enjoy the ride Crack in Time offers. That said, if you strictly love the goofier tone of the PS2 titles, you may not enjoy the more subdued humor and more serious tone of Crack in Time. Personally, I can't tell which style I really prefer. I know Up Your Arsenal certainly made me laugh the most, but nothing in the PS2 games affected my emotions the way certain points Crack in Time did. That payoff with Orvis wanting Clank to follow his dreams, as flimsy and corny as it is, just gets to me in a good way. Still, I think there are maybe some technical faults here. Like I alluded to, Nefarious is in it purely for revenge against Ratchet, yet barely crosses paths with him, making him feel a bit inconsequential along the way. Yeah, it's due to him that Clank was found by the Zoni. It just feels like you could remove Nefarious and still tell a similar story. Have the Zoni locate Clank due to mystical powers, have Clank warn Ratchet and Azimuth about the dangers of using the Great Clock much earlier on, and subsequently have Azimuth established as a villain much earlier on. It would have been a stronger story to connect with and like Azimuth, then have to brush against him in a race to a Great Clock. The actual end twist of Azimuth's betrayal doesn't feel like it comes out of nowhere, but it does just feel like something that has to happen due to plot obligations, and well, we need a plot twist. Again, Nefarious was incredibly well written and acted as per usual. He's still my favorite Ratchet villain, but like I said in Tools of Destruction, if they want to tell a more serious story, I'm going to look at it a bit more seriously. All that said though, I see myself playing a Crack in Time again, and I'm sure I'll enjoy the story the second time around, and the third, and the fourth, so don't get me wrong. What I may not enjoy so much from those replays, however, were some game design choices.
Oops. That's a vacation picture from the Mactar Resort Single Mingle. Don't know how that got in there.
Control-wise, the game feels like a step up from Tools of Destruction, with the platform manipulation that Quest for Booty brought to the series. Ratchet, again, feels great to control, and oh man, this Omni Wrench throw. I don't know why it's so addicting to do this, but I just can't stop. Crack in Time also introduces its own elements such as hover boots. These let you whisk around quickly and give you an option to hover since you're not with Clank for a large portion of the game. Even better are some courses specifically designed for use with the hover boots, which help add another fun, frenetic branch to this series. Some small planets are specifically designed to test your skills with these, and taken on their own face value are pretty fun for what they are. It's hard to nail down exactly how Ratchet feels better. It's kind of like going from Going Commando to Up Your Arsenal. The tweaks are very slight, but you can definitely feel them. Ratchet also gains some contextual gadgets. The swing shot returns once again, but now Ratchet gains an Omni Soaker, which is pretty much like the Hydro Displacer from early on in the series. This doesn't add too much other than seeing an area that needs liquid or oil, running to get liquid or oil, then coming back and shooting it. It kinda feels standard to say, but Crack in Time also doesn't reach the high bar set earlier in the series for weapons either. The tornado gun I found issue with in Tools of Destruction is replaced with a weapon that can shoot a ball of energy controlled by the 6-axis, which works better but still doesn't feel incredibly responsive. Other weapons like a belching blaster, a Tesla spike shooter, and more get the job done but don't impress. Overall though, there are still a nice variety of options ultimately. In Tools of Destruction, you could add additional upgrades to Raritanium found in levels, but in Crack in Time you find mods for a select few weapons tucked away as collectibles. This gives you substantially less return for your time investment versus the prior system, and ultimately you'll probably just find one mod you like and stick with it, which doesn't feel as good as constantly upgrading your weapon with resources. Clank, however, ultimately sees the biggest gameplay improvement. Back in my Tools of Destruction video, I stated that his gameplay felt like it was lagging behind Ratchet's ever-increasing flexibility. In this title, that is alleviated. Clank is still a bit sluggish, can't take too many hits, and still dishes out only a basic combo attack, and he doesn't have any robotic helpers or Zoni. Instead, what he has are brain-teasing gameplay portions involving the path plotting of multiple Clanks, in addition to some area of effect bombs that can slow the flow of time. Basically, you come to segments where there are a few colored buttons. Standing on one and hitting record allows you to plot a path for a sort of projection of Clank. It will follow your exact movements, so you can make a copied Clank stand on the switch to open a door for the actual Clank. For smarter folk, these sections were probably a bit too easy, but I found them to be the perfect difficulty. I never felt like I was hitting my head against a wall with these, and while they stumped me some late in the game, I found what I needed to do at a very brisk pace and really enjoyed these. I actually kind of wish Insomniac had released a small game based just on these elements. I found it rather enjoyable. Clank also has some areas where you point some lasers at a projection of a planet to fix time holes appearing around the galaxy. You only do these a few times, and they're okay distractions from the main puzzle solving, but frankly they just don't hold a candle to Clank's main event. So, to get around the galaxy, we have spaceflight. It's nothing more complicated than horizontal direction. You can't fly up or down, which is good, but ultimately kind of a negative too, in a way, when it comes to fights in space. Every now and then throughout the story, you'll bump into aliens who want you dead, so you kind of fly after them at an angle and shoot at them to destroy them. You'll get a certain number you have to destroy, which knocks down the barrier so you can shoot at the main ship, rinse and repeat. While I enjoyed the simplified navigation, it really hurts the potential of the ship combat, which admittedly was done better in prior titles. When not shooting at opposing factions, you can stop by an arena and play a game based on Captain Quark, or compete in combat arenas much like prior titles. There are also a number of small planets with challenging platform or combat requirements, which I like as a base idea. You even get a few radio stations to choose from in each sector of the galaxy, interlaced with comedic clips from the radio hosts or news updates from anchors. These planets ultimately boil down to just basic platforms floating around in mid-air or just shooting a set number of enemies, but it was nice to have a bunch of smaller areas to explore and obtain weapon mods and to collect Zoni. I guess I can't dance around this criticism any longer. Scattered throughout these small planets and squirreled away on larger planets are the Zoni. Much like gold bolts in prior games, which also make a return in Crack in Time, there are 40 to collect. Every few Zoni you collect actually provide upgrades for your ship, which is neat. It's a nice incentive to actually collect them. However, larger planets required for story progression are almost literally gated off until you collect certain amounts of Zoni. So, if you're like me and really digging the story and not wanting to veer off the main path too often, you'll often find yourself brushing up against a planet, being told you need to collect more MacGuffins to progress, sighing, and distractedly checking your map to find out where you can go get more Zoni. Ratchet games haven't really had to stoop to this kind of artificial lengthening before, and it's really disappointing to see it plague such a great title. This really hurts the pacing of the game, and it makes what would otherwise be fun extra content into forced adventures that distract you when you'd rather be advancing the narrative. These neatly designed challenges become something you dislike when you're forced into doing them. Hell, this kind of thing can severely hamper other games, take Sonic Unleashed for example. But thankfully Crack in Time is still so tightly designed and charming that it's just more of a nuisance than something you'll come to loathe. And to be fair with the example I mentioned, in Sonic Unleashed you had to replay levels you'd already been through to get the MacGuffins to advance. In Crack in Time you can explore entirely new areas to get to them. As I've alluded to, the presentation in this game is very nice. The cutscenes and story are engaging, the music's great, and the game just looks great overall, really. The little scenes that play every time you acquire a weapon are especially endearing. This is the last mainline Ratchet to be 60 frames per second so far, and from my time with Into the Nexus, I miss it already. It's hard to find anything to nitpick about the raw presentation. It's just the cherry on top of a fantastic game. I've had a few nitpicks with Crack in Time obviously, but again, it's probably tied with Going Commando for my favorite in the series. It's smart, funny, addicting, and all kinds of other buzzwords I could throw at you. There's just a perfect balance of platforming and combat in this game. If you're still looking for a jumping on point with either the Future series or Ratchet & Clank in general, A Crack in Time is a great entry to see this series hitting its stride. You're caught up with the story thanks to Captain Quark while the game installs, so while it's preferred that you start with at least Tools of Destruction, you can get enough info from the jump to know what you absolutely need to with this game. Crack in Time comes highly recommended from me. This has been Mikonos Fan. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time with Into the Nexus on Learning to Love PlayStation.